The morning sun struggled to pierce the heavy velvet curtains of the sitting room in Clarence's house, casting long, hesitant stripes across the Persian rug. Princess Anne, known for her no-nonsense demeanor and a work ethic that could exhaust staff half her age, was already on her second cup of tea. She was reviewing the day's itinerary, a dense document packed with official engagements, charity meetings, and the relentless logistics that came with being the hardest-working member of the royal family. Her private secretary, a calm and efficient man named Alistair, stood nearby, ready to take notes. The door opened quietly, and a young footman entered with a silver tray. His name was Peter, barely 19, and this was his first royal household position. He moved with the careful, deliberate steps of someone still learning the invisible rules of palace life, and he was to clear the princess's breakfast things. As he reached for a plate, the sitting room door was suddenly pushed open wide without a knock. Two women swept in, their heels clicking with sharp authority on the polished floor. They were mid-conversation, their voices carrying a tone of self-importance that immediately grated on the quiet morning. They were senior members of Camilla, Duchess of Cornwall's staff. One was her private secretary, a woman known for her sharp tongue and belief that her proximity to the future queen consort elevated her above the usual palace protocols. The other was a personal assistant, carrying a leather-bound organizer and looking flustered. "Princess Anne," the private secretary said, offering a curt nod that was more of an acknowledgement than a respectful greeting. "Apologies for the intrusion. We need to use the South Terrace for a photographic call this afternoon. The Duchess's office requires it for a charity feature. We need to ensure the space is cleared of any maintenance work." Princess Anne looked up from her papers, her gaze steady and unimpressed. "The South Terrace is currently having its stonework repointed. There is scaffolding and dust. It is entirely unsuitable for a photograph." The private secretary's smile was thin and practiced. "We've been assured by the Duchess's communications team that the scaffolding can be temporarily draped. It will be a simple matter. The magazine is very keen on the classical backdrop." Anne's eyes narrowed slightly. "It is not a simple matter. The work has a schedule. The stonemasons are on a tight timeline. They cannot stop and start for a photo call." The personal assistant, eager to contribute, piped up, "Her Grace's office has already spoken to the master of the households department. We were told we could coordinate directly with the teams on the ground." Her tone suggested that this was a done deal, a mere formality she was now informing the princess of. Alistair stepped forward. "I believe there may have been a misunderstanding. The terrace is under the princess's purview for the next 2 weeks due to the renovation. Any request should go through this office." The private secretary's expression flickered with annoyance, as if a mere secretary was an obstacle beneath her notice. "We are operating on the Duchess's schedule. The photographer is booked. We don't have time for bureaucratic detours. We'll just take a quick look ourselves to assess the draping possibilities." She began to turn, intending to sweep back out and head for the terrace, her assumption of authority absolute. It was in that moment that the private secretary's gaze fell on young Peter. He was frozen mid-task, holding a delicate china plate, caught in the crossfire of a senior staff dispute. He was an easy target for her frustration. "And you," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "What are you gawping at? This is a private conversation. Don't you have some polishing to do? Or perhaps you could run ahead to the terrace and make sure the workmen know to expect us. Move along." Peter's face flushed a deep, painful crimson. He stammered, I was just clearing the princess's." He looked towards Anne, then his eyes wide with a plea for understanding and a deep sense of humiliation. He was being dressed down by a stranger in front of the person he was trying to serve respectfully. He looked down at the floor, his shoulders hunching, the plate rattling slightly in his shaking hands. The private secretary dismissed him with a wave of her hand, turning her attention back to Alistair. "We'll need the keys to the terrace gate." But Princess Anne was no longer looking at her papers. where she was watching Peter. She saw the slump in his young shoulders, the tremor in his hands, the burn of shame on his cheeks. She saw a member of her household, a young man just starting out, being publicly belittled by someone who had no authority over him whatsoever. In the rigid hierarchy of the palace, there were protocols for everything, and chief among them was respect for the chain of command. These women had just shattered that protocol in her own sitting room. "Peter," Anne said, and her voice calm and clear. It cut through the tension in the room like a knife. The young footman looked up, startled. "Please, finish what you were doing. Take your time." Her tone was gentle, a stark contrast to the sharpness that had just been directed at him. The two staff members from Camilla's office looked on, momentarily confused. The private secretary opened her mouth to speak again, but Anne held up a hand, silencing her without even looking at her. Peter, with a grateful and still shaky breath, placed the plate on his tray and quietly left the room. Only then did Princess Anne turn her full, formidable attention back to the two women. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "You will not speak to any member of my staff in that manner, ever," she said. Her words were measured, deliberate, each one landing with the weight of a stone. "You came into my private sitting room, unannounced, and began making demands based on a conversation you claim to have had, but which I have not been informed of. You have now compounded that discourtesy by publicly embarrassing a junior member of this household, a young man who was simply doing his job." The private secretary's practiced smile faltered. "Princess Anne, I assure you, I was merely trying to—" "You were trying to throw your weight around," Anne interrupted, her eyes like chips of ice. "You have no authority here. This is my office. These are my staff. The South Terrace is under my jurisdiction, and you will not have access to it." The personal assistant looked horrified, clutching her organizer as if it were a shield. The private secretary, however, seemed to think she could still recover. "I understand your concern, ma'am, but perhaps if we could speak with the Duchess about this, a compromise could be—" "You misunderstand me," Anne said, her voice dropping even lower, a dangerous quiet. "Man, this is not a negotiation. There will be no compromise. The issue is not the terrace. The issue is conduct. Your conduct. You came into this room and behaved as if you owned it. You treated a member of the royal household as if he were beneath your notice. That is unacceptable." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze pinning them both in place. "I will be speaking to the Duchess's office myself, and I will be making it clear that from this moment forward, you are both banned from any area of my household. You are not to speak to my staff. You are not to enter my offices. You are not to make demands on my properties. Your access is revoked. Is that clear?" The silence that followed was deafening. The two women stood completely deflated, their earlier arrogance evaporated. The private secretary finally managed a weak, "Yes, Your Royal Highness." "Then you may leave," Anne said, picking up her pen and returning her gaze to her papers. And close the door behind you." They left without another word, their sharp heels clicking a frantic, retreating rhythm down the hall. Alistair, who had watched the entire exchange with a barely concealed smile, quietly poured the princess another cup of tea. Anne took it, her expression unchanging. She hadn't sought the confrontation, but she never shied away from one when the principal was right. It wasn't about the terrace, or the photo call, or even the slight against her own authority. And it was about the boy, Peter. It was about the quiet dignity of a young man doing his best, who had been humiliated for no reason. In Anne's world, you earned respect through service and hard work, not through the reflected status of your employer. And anyone who forgot that, no matter how highly placed they thought themselves, would be swiftly and decisively reminded. The news of the incident spread through the palace corridors with the speed of a well-kept secret becoming public gossip. Now by lunchtime, the story had been dissected in the staff dining rooms and whispered about in the hushed hallways. The consensus was one of grim satisfaction. The Duchess of Cornwall's staff, particularly the private secretary, had a reputation for being pushy, for acting as if their proximity to the future queen consort gave them a license to bypass the established hierarchies that had governed palace life for decades. But they were seen as new courtiers, less versed in the old ways of quiet diplomacy and more accustomed to the aggressive tactics of modern media management. Princess Anne, on the other hand, was a known quantity. She was the monarch's only daughter, a woman who had carved her own path not on ceremony, but on sheer, relentless hard work. She was known to be tough, demanding, and intolerant of fools, but she was also fiercely loyal to those who worked for her. She knew the names of their children, and asked about their parents' health, and was renowned for remembering a small kindness or a job well done years after the event. To her, the palace staff were not invisible servants. They were the engine that made the entire complicated machinery of royalty function. For young Peter, the morning had been a bewildering roller coaster. He had spent the hour after the incident in a fog of anxiety, convinced he had somehow done something wrong, and that he would be reprimanded for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. A senior footman, an old hand named Davies, who had been in royal service for 40 years, found him polishing silver in a pantry, his movements mechanical, his face still pale. Davies put a hand on his shoulder. "Heard you had a bit of a run-in with some visitors this morning, lad." Peter's heart sank. "I'm sorry, Mr. Davies. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I was just clearing the princess's breakfast, and they came in, and I just stood there. I should have left immediately." Davies chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "Left? Lad, you were exactly where you were supposed to be. You were doing your job. The people who caused the trouble were the ones who forgot where they were." He leaned in conspiratorially. "Word is, the princess gave them both barrels, banned them from the household, all because of how they spoke to you." Peter stared at him, uncomprehending. "Because of me?" "Because of how they spoke to you," Davies corrected gently. "The princess doesn't like bullies. Never has. She saw one today, and she dealt with it. You remember that. In this house, you do your job with pride and you treat everyone with respect, and you'll get the same back, from the top down." He gave Peter's shoulder a final pat and moved on, leaving the young man with a profound and unexpected sense of being valued, of being seen. Meanwhile, in the Duchess of Cornwall's office at Clarence House, the atmosphere was tense. The private secretary, whose name was Penelope Finch, had returned with her tail between her legs and had been forced to recount the morning's events to Camilla's chief of staff, a man named Julian. Julian was a seasoned operator, adept at navigating the treacherous waters of royal rivalries and family dynamics. He listened to Penelope's account, near which he tried to frame as a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by the princess's legendary temper. "She was incredibly unreasonable, Julian," Penelope complained. "We simply went to discuss a logistical matter about the terrace. The photographer is booked. The charity is expecting—" "You went into the Princess Royal's private sitting room, unannounced, and started issuing orders to her staff?" Julian's voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "We weren't issuing orders. We just needed to get the matter sorted quickly. And that footman was just standing there, gawping. I merely told him to move along." "And you did this in front of the princess," Julian stated, not as a question. He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. He knew the Princess Royal well enough by reputation. She was the least pompous and most direct of the senior royals, but she was also fiercely protective of her own patch. To go into her space and publicly dress down one of her people was not just a faux pas. It was an act of war in the delicate ecosystem of the palace. He looked at Penelope. "Her actions are a direct consequence of yours. You overstepped, and now you are banned from her household. Do you understand what that means? You cannot liaise with her office on anything. You cannot attend any meetings where she is present. Any matter that requires cross-departmental communication will now have to go through me. You have effectively made yourself a block in the chain of command." Penelope's face fell. She hadn't considered the long-term professional implications. She saw herself as a powerful figure, an architect of the Duchess's public image. But in the palace's internal structure, she had just been neutered. She had been cut off from a significant portion of the royal operation. The situation was a nightmare for Julian. He now had to manage the fallout with the Princess Royal's office, smooth over the Duchess's potential embarrassment, and deal with a senior staff member whose judgment he now seriously questioned. He picked up the phone to call Alistair, Princess Anne's private secretary, to begin the delicate process of damage limitation. It was a call he was not looking forward to. The call between Julian and Alistair was a masterclass in polite, decoded communication. Julian expressed his deep regret over the unfortunate incident and assured Alistair that the matter was being taken very seriously within the Duchess's office. Alistair, in turn, was courteous but firm, reiterating the princess's position that the staff in question were not to have any further contact with her household. The conversation ended with the usual pleasantries, but the underlying message was clear. A line had been drawn. Princess Anne, meanwhile, had moved on with her day. She had a meeting with the Save the Children Fund, a charity she had been president of for over 40 years. She traveled across London in a modest car with no outrider motorcade, just her detective and her lady-in-waiting. At the charity's headquarters, she was all business, listening intently to reports from field workers, asking sharp, intelligent questions about distribution networks and funding gaps. She had no time for the pomp that others craved, and her focus was on the job at hand. Later that evening, back at her apartment, she mentioned the incident to her husband, Sir Timothy Lawrence, over a quiet dinner. He listened without interrupting, a habit he had learned over years of marriage to a woman who got straight to the point. "I banned 2 of Camilla's staff from the household today," she said matter-of-factly, cutting into her lamb chop. Timothy raised an eyebrow. "That sounds eventful." "What did they do?" "Came into my sitting room this morning, acting as if they owned the place. Wanted to shut down work on the South Terrace for a photo call. When a young footman was simply standing there, doing his job, one of them dressed him down in front of everyone. Humiliated him for no reason. And you intervened." "I don't have bullies in my house, Timothy. I don't care who they work for. That young man is doing his best, learning his trade. He doesn't deserve to be spoken to like that by some jumped-up apparatchik who thinks a title rubs off on her." She took a sip of water. "So I told them they were no longer welcome in any part of my household, permanently." Timothy smiled. It was so quintessentially Anne. She didn't care about the political ramifications or the potential for a story in the papers. She cared about a principle and a person. "How did they take it? Like startled rabbits, I imagine." I didn't stay to watch." A faint, wry smile touched her lips. "I suspect Camilla will hear about it. If she's sensible, she'll deal with it. If not—" She shrugged, a gesture that said she was perfectly prepared for whatever came next. The next morning, the repercussions began to ripple outwards. The planned photographic call on the South Terrace was canceled. The magazine was informed of a scheduling conflict, a bland excuse that fooled no one in the know. More significantly, a memo, discreet and unsigned, circulated among the senior staff of the household. It didn't mention names, but it reiterated the importance of adhering to established protocols when liaising with other offices. It stressed the need for courtesy and respect towards all members of the royal household, regardless of their position. It was a shot across the bow, and everyone knew where it had come from and who it was aimed at. Penelope Finch found herself frozen out. Colleagues who had once sought her favor now gave her a wide berth. Her requests for information from other departments were met with polite but firm delays. She had become a liability, a person whose presence could complicate matters. The phone call she was dreading finally came late in the afternoon. Julian requested her presence in his office. He was standing by the window, looking out over the London skyline. He turned as she entered. "Penelope, as I've been thinking about the situation with the Princess Royal's office. I've already apologized, Julian. I've said I was willing to write a letter. It's gone beyond that," he said, his voice regretful but firm. "The Duchess is aware of what happened. She is, as you can imagine, displeased, not just with the incident itself, but with the subsequent disruption it has caused. Having a senior member of her staff who is barred from interacting with a key part of the family's operations is not a sustainable position." Penelope felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that we need to find a way to reset the relationship. The most straightforward way is to remove the obstacle." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I'm afraid we're going to have to let you go, Penelope. It will be handled discreetly with a generous settlement. But your position here has become untenable." She stared at him, aghast. "You're firing me? Over a footman? Over a stupid argument about a terrace?" "It's not about the terrace. It's about judgment. You walked into another royal's private space and acted without the proper respect. You antagonized a very senior member of the family, and in doing so, you have damaged your own utility to this office. I'm sorry, but my decision is final." Penelope Finch, and who had entered the room that morning as a powerful gatekeeper to the future queen consort, left it an hour later with her career in tatters, carrying a cardboard box of her personal effects. The news of her departure spread as quickly as the original story had. It served as a potent reminder that in the world of the palace, power was a delicate thing. It could be wielded by a princess who chose to defend a young footman, and it could be stripped away from a courtier who forgot that respect was not something to be demanded, but earned. A few days later, a small unmarked envelope appeared in the staff pantry addressed to Peter. Inside was a simple handwritten note on thick cream-colored paper. It bore no return address, just the royal cipher. The handwriting was distinctive, sharp, and clear. It read, "Peter, I wanted to thank you for your quiet professionalism the other morning. Please do not let the thoughtless actions of others ever diminish your pride in your work. It is noticed and valued. A." Peter read the note 3 times, his hands trembling slightly. He carefully placed it back in the envelope and tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket, over his heart. He had started the week as an invisible junior footman, nervous and eager to please. He ended it with a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. That true royalty was not about a title, but about character. And on that Tuesday morning in a sunlit sitting room, his princess had shown him exactly what that meant.